I'm Mark Bergin, and my novel is called Apprehension. Kelly was a pro until his niece was murdered right before his eyes. His family says he failed her, but Kelly can't share his one shocking, buried, and criminal act of vengeance. Now, his fellow detectives digging into another case will find the evidence that can end Kelly's career and send him to prison. But this week, Kelly must focus on a pedophile trial to protect a child. It should be a slam dunk, except the hotshot defense attorney is his new girlfriend, Rachel Cohen. She has a secret, too, one that will destroy Kelly on the stand. Will his friends, working in secret to save him, find the missing piece before he's forced to the breaking point and beyond?
Book lovers unite! I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. Hey, everybody. On today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Mark Bergin, author of Apprehension, which is a dramatic story that actually discusses police suicide, which is a topic that we don't really hear about. But police suicide is a real thing, and I was really happy to speak with Mark, who is also a former Alexandria, Virginia police officer, to gain some insight not only into that topic, but also into his book. Mark Bergin, Apprehension, starts right now.
In this chapter, we meet a patrol officer. We've just seen an undercover drug unit trying to make an arrest, and the bad guy gets in a car and drives away, which leads us to Pursuit. Tuesday, November 1st, 1988, 15:30 to 15:40 hours. Patrol Officer Pammy Martinson was eating lunch in a restaurant on Washington Street when the TAC pursuit call came over the radio. Washington was the main north-south boulevard down the middle of Old Town. It changed names and connected the George Washington Parkway on the north side of town with the Mount Vernon Highway that ran south to, wait for it, Mount Vernon, home of our first president and source of much of Alexandria's historical identity. Better that connection than the Confederacy, she had once remarked to her field training officer, an Alexandria native. She got a lesson in history from the loser's side that night. That was the first time she'd heard the term the War of Northern Aggression, never uttered during her Pennsylvania public schooling, but common here in the South. The winners write the textbooks. Lunch, 10-7 in radio code, was what officers called any meal period, morning, noon, or after midnight, or as now, late afternoon. They got 15 minutes to get there once communications cleared them, and 30 minutes to eat. The trick was to already be in the parking lot when you asked to be cleared for 10-7. It gave you more time to sit. Not to relax. You never really relaxed on duty, and padded restaurant booths don't accommodate gun belts well, with handcuffs and flashlight rings pressing the seat, and your seat. 10-7 was just enough time to order, take off your coat, slurp coffee, and wolf down whatever. You ate fast in patrol to ensure you ate at all before you were called off on a hot call, like tonight. Her radio bleeped. All units, especially Sector 1 units, TAC is in pursuit of a drug suspect on the north side. They're on Channel 3. Suspect is a black male, black jacket, blue jeans, black cap, and a light-colored Toyota four-door. Virginia tag Edward Peter William 312. They're northbound on North Alfred Street, approaching 1st. Units 214, 215, Sector 1 supervisor, acknowledge. She ran out the door of the restaurant into the cold parking lot before the acknowledgments began. So fast she'd left her thick nylon cruiser jacket behind, forgotten in the booth. She was Unit 213, not assigned to the call, but when it's a pursuit, you just go. She was on Washington Street, which ran parallel to North Alfred Street and 2 blocks east. They were 2 blocks from her, so she might get in on it. Martinson's front-wheel drive Plymouth, white with black police letters and a light bar with red and blue lenses, plowed out of the parking lot, front tires chirping as they fought for both acceleration and cornering. She headed north, toward the last location given, in time to see the Toyota fishtail onto Washington Street just a block up, headed north, away from her, closely followed by 2 compact civilian-looking cars, TAC's jump cars. They were not authorized for pursuit, their only police gear being magnetic spinning blue lights stuck out the windows onto the roofs, called Kojak lights after the television detective show. She caught up, the jump cars fell back, and she leaned forward to shout over the siren into the mic still clipped to the dashboard. Unit 213 in pursuit, northbound, TAC suspect car, tag matches, one occupant. Now passing Slater's Lane, north onto the parkway. Confirmed charges? This last question meaning, am I actually allowed to chase this guy? Confirmed, drug charges, saw a deal, came the clipped answer from a TAC unit. Good enough. Weapons? None seen, but a drug deal. He's the seller. We got the buyer. Go get him, Pammy, came the reply from TAC. Drug deals. Any felony implied the likelihood of weapons, and excitement excused the informality. Headquarters, give her code 5, came the voice of Unit 511. Pammy recognized the voice of T.C. Sharp, the senior TAC officer, cooler than most, and able to remember to ask for special radio procedures that limited transmissions to only those directly involved in the pursuit. Units did as ordered, and Martinson had the air. The pursuit lasted a minute and a mile, until early rush hour traffic clogged the road. Martinson held about 3 car lengths behind the bad guy, zigzagging between lanes. It was nearly dusk in wispy snow, but not dark enough for the emergency lights on her cruiser to really stand out. The unmarked attack units dropped out of the pursuit, per official policy, but were following as best they could despite being regularly blocked by commuters. Finally, passing Washington Reagan National Airport into Arlington County and just out of Alexandria's jurisdiction, the suspect's Toyota skidded to a stop in the right-hand lane, blocked by stopped cars. There was perfectly good grass on either side of the blocked lanes to pass on, no buildings, no trees or bushes close, but the suspect had tunnel vision and could not envision driving anywhere but on the paved surface. Or he was just stupid, Martinson thought. If crooks weren't stupid, our job would be harder. She cut off her siren and thumbed the mic. 213 headquarters, stopped just into Arlington near the first airport entrance. One in the car, stand by. Dozens of civilians in sight, but she was alone, having outrun the TAC cars, and the nearest cruiser to her was a ways out, judging by the distant ascending howl of its siren. Martins had exited her car, drew her revolver with her right hand, and advanced on the suspect. She hoped to get to him and get him out before the traffic jam eased open and let him move forward and away. She only got as far as her own front bumper before he fired. The blasts were deafening to the civilians and cars nearby, but Martinson never heard them. Stress closed her ears but sharpened her sight, and she watched slow-mo orange puffs of exploding gunpowder bloom like roses from the barrel of a pistol suddenly thrust out a window of the suspect's car. Just the gun, no face behind it, unaimed, but surprisingly accurate, and she heard the bullets hit. Her gun was out, but her subconscious made its own snap decision. Flight, not fight. She threw herself to her right and crashed down to the ground onto her shoulder. She pointed her gun, but held her fire, having no clear view of the shooter now. Shots continued over his trunk lid, muzzle flashes bright, and she rolled back under the bumper of her cruiser. She felt the fluid heat of blood on her left arm and neck and face. She'd felt no impact, but guessed that pain would follow. No fear, yet. She was aware of engines revving and horns bleeding from civilian cars all around and behind her. She felt drenched in her own blood, but could not tell where she was hit or why she wasn't dead. With bullets coming in, she couldn't dwell. Her arms and body still worked, so she scooted farther under the bumper as far as she could till she was wedged on her right side, gun hand out in front and braced by her left, but lacking a target, so still unable to bring herself to fire. As the suspect vehicle finally moved away through a hole in the traffic, she heard one last shot, the almost simultaneous pop from the gun muzzle and whang of the bullet into the radiator of her cruiser above her, as the other bullets had, releasing radiator fluid to flow onto her, not blood. Just for that moment did she start pressing the trigger on her Smith & Wesson .38, holding her breath, heart pounding but sight steady, and stopped without firing as the suspect vehicle juked left in front of a car that blocked her aim. Another 2 seconds to take the strain off the trigger finger and lower the hammer, then another 2 for a deep, gasping breath, and angry Officer Martinson rolled back out from under her shot-up Plymouth cruiser, got back in, and re-entered pursuit mode. She caught the suspect less than a mile further north on the parkway. No longer maintaining a safe gap, Pammy floored the gas pedal, and the K-car cruiser rammed once, twice, into the back bumper of the Toyota as they veered right up the ramp from the parkway onto the 14th Street Bridge that carried Interstate 395 from Arlington into downtown Washington, D.C. 213 back in pursuit, onto bridge in D.C. Shots fired, shots fired. He fired. Copy 213, shots fired. D.C. was advised, they're en route. Flying up the ramp to merge onto the highway over the bridge, the suspect slowed to avoid a car on the main highway surface. Martinson jammed the brakes, but her front tires slipped, slick with spewing radiator fluid. The cruiser crunched into the suspect's rear fender and spun it out like a stock car. The little sedan crossed 4 lanes and banged the center guardrail, its bumper, license tag, and grill pieces flying off in a splintery arc, lurching back into the traffic lane but skidding, slowing, stopping, leaning over on a broken front suspension. Looking past the wreck, Martinson saw the D.C. police responding from their side of the river, multiple sets of oncoming emergency lights flashing in the late afternoon distance. The Jefferson Memorial shining off pink as the setting sun peeked through a cloud gap and struck its marble dome. Martinson had a long second to admire the tableau from the driver's seat of her cruiser. She had stopped behind the Toyota but offset to block the fast lane and the lane next to it, a safe zone between the suspect and the passing cars. She caught her breath and across her hood took in the perfect lineup of her hood ornament, the cockeyed suspect car, the clouds of blue tire smoke as the D.C. cops skidded to a halt on their side, the memorial, all seen through a mist of steam rising from her damaged and overheated engine. Then, with the distant orange flash and the tink of a bullet passing through her windshield, the shooting began again. End of chapter.
Wow. Fantastic.
You like that?
I do. And especially being a Washington, D.C. native myself, I appreciate that you set this story in Alexandria. I was familiar with most of the streets you mentioned.
Oh, good. It's where I was a cop. I was a cop for 28 years there, so it's sort of where I know.
Yeah, so it sounds like this pursuit started somewhere in Old Town Alexandria and worked its way up to where it's like the Crystal City, Pentagon City area, and then across into D.C.
Exactly, going very much in that direction, but on the Parkway, so it wasn't going to be on the Route 1 section that gets to Crystal City.
Gotcha. OGW Parkway.
Yep.
Right on. Well, again, thank you for sharing that. And before we begin, you kind of alluded to this already, but can you give us a little bit of background into your career?
I was a police officer for 28 years in Alexandria. And before that, I was a newspaper reporter covering the police. I'd always wanted to be a cop, but I never actually thought about making that jump. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and most of the cops that I knew or knew of weren't exactly role models. But when I got to be a reporter here and got to know officers, got to either go on ride-alongs or be present while they were testifying in court, I saw how important the job was to them and how normal they were, that you could actually be a normal person and be a cop.
Yeah.
So I applied and was hired. I started in January of 1986.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that because growing up in DC was a different experience from dealing with police from when I got older and I started having friends that were in the Metro Police or DC Police or over in the Arlington County Police Department as well. And you're right. At the end of the day, we're all just human beings. Growing
up around Philadelphia in the 70s, Philly had the longest lasting federal anti-corruption police probe in U.S. history. It just never ended. They'd roll up some guys and they'd find other guys and it would just keep going on. And this sounds kind of glib, but since I wasn't brutal, corrupt, or racist, I didn't think I could be a cop. I wasn't a 6'4" white former MP that took graft money and beat up minority people. I mean, there were plenty of good cops, and all the cops did a good job, but that's what the police, that's how I saw police. And it's unfortunate because it certainly isn't always true. It was more true then. But I got lucky. I met some good cops in Alexandria and had the chance to jump over.
How did the story of Detective John Kelly come to you? Was this always something that you wanted to write about, or was it inspired by a specific event?
No specific event. Certainly the opportunity to write was triggered by an event, but I'd always wanted to write. Growing up, since I was a young teenager, I remember reading Alistair MacLean in particular, thriller novelists like that. And Alistair MacLean, Put the Guns of Navarone and Were Eagles There, he was the first author that I reread to see how he did it, to see how he built the story, how he framed the events to create suspense.
The deconstruction of the story.
Yes. Yes, the first time I ever really looked at books that way. So I'd always wanted to write, but then you become a newspaper reporter and you're writing all the time, and then you become a cop and you're too busy. About 30 years ago, when I was in my second year on the police department, I was on a drug unit. It is the same unit that features heavily in this book. And I was super busy and probably super stressed. working 50, 60 hours a week on the street, another 10 or 20 in court 2 or 3 times a week. When you arrest a lot of people, you go to court a lot. Drinking too much, about to go through a divorce, had a lot of stress. And during that time, for some reason, a bunch of ideas popped into my head for a book. And I was fortunate enough that I actually wrote them down. So I had 3 pages that I immediately put away for a long time. Thought about them, never really got them out, but had them in my mind. And then at the end of my career, I had 2 heart attacks and died.
Oh, geez.
My heart stopped. And the doctors, who weren't there, but they can theorize that I restarted it when I hit the ground each time. I ended up having double bypass surgery, and then I ended up having my cardiologist and the city cardiologist tell me I should not go back to work. So I had made 28 years, and that wasn't a bad length of time. I had a pension. But I knew I had to do something rather than just sit around, since I couldn't be a cop anymore. So I decided to write. I got out the notes. I reread a number of my favorite authors just to sort of put myself back in the mood. And I took the notes that I had. That chapter about Pammy Martinson and the pursuit was one of the most fleshed out set of notes that I had. That was some middle stuff. But I had a beginning for the book and an end for the book. It was originally, well, it still is, it's about a detective and the 4 best and worst days of his life. He's prepping for a trial to protect a kid from the kid's father, who's a pedophile. And the defense attorney in the case, the public defender, happens to be his girlfriend. Now, they're keeping their relationship a secret because it kind of wasn't cool to be a cop dating a defense attorney. She has a wonderful secret that she's about to tell him, but she also has a terrible secret about what she has to do at trial, and it's going to hurt him. While he's prepping, he finds out that something terrible he did a year ago is about to be unearthed, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. And he knows it's probably going to end his career and likely send him to jail, but he has to press on. Basically, what I do in the book is I take 4 days and just keep dropping rocks on his head until he gets to the end and kind of gets pushed beyond the breaking point.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that, you know, given the nature of this story, you could have really went overly dramatical with it, but instead you chose to write it as an authentic police procedural.
And I hope not to its detriment. I had a thriller writer tell me at a conference called Thriller Fest, "You haven't written a thriller. There's no villain. Your hero is not a superhero. He doesn't overcome overwhelming odds." And I said, yeah. I wanted to write a story that a cop could read and say, yep, that's what it's like out there. That he or she could give to his family to say, you want to know what I go through? Read this book. As I say, the book's about stress. It does key on stress and police suicide. And partly as a result of my illness and recovery, I decided to dedicate part of the funds, whatever money I make, half of it is going to go to police anti-suicide programs.
Now, this story takes place in 1988, and yes, I'm sure to readers, it's clear that after experiencing this tragic event with his niece, that he's going through PTSD. But I'm wondering if he realizes this and if the folks around him realize this is what's going on being in that era.
Kelly doesn't realize it. He thinks he's a tough guy. Cops are supposed to be tough. I remember a good friend of mine, in the one circumstance during my career in which a fellow officer was murdered, my friend was in a roll call immediately after and actually had tears in his eyes when an old cop turned to him and said, "Toughen up, kid."
Wow.
And that's what it was. You know, in the 80s, maybe even into the 90s, we're supposed to be hard guys. We're supposed to sit on our emotions, our feelings. And it's that bottling up that leads to PTSD. That term wasn't common back then, and I don't use it in this book, but it's clear that Kelly is stressed And it's clear that some of his friends know it, and they try to reach out to him in ways that are vastly improved on now. I'm very lucky that even as a retired officer, I've been given an opportunity to be a part of my old department's peer debriefing team. Mm-hmm. I'm someone that officers under stress can call. I'm also someone who can be called by a supervisor to say, hey, reach out to Officer so-and-so. He's having a tough time. He either just had a major case that was ugly, or he's going through a divorce, or his kid's sick, or whatever it might be. I'm a resource for him to talk to. And more departments are getting better at stuff like that, but they weren't back in 1988.
Yeah, I didn't realize that those resources existed nowadays. You kind of answered my next question, because I was thinking that in the story, you do get a sense that, you know, these cops are sticking together, but I didn't understand why John was hesitant to really get the help he needed.
Almost nobody ever wants to admit they have a weakness, they have a problem. And the prevailing concern among cops is, if you ask for help, if you're emotionally troubled or disturbed, they'll take your gun away. They'll take your job away. They'll put you on what's called the rubber gun squad, or they'll not let you be a cop anymore at all. So you hide things, or you hid things.
Wow. I hate to say it, but it actually makes sense. You know, police suicide is more common than people realize, but it's hardly ever discussed.
And I'm hoping the book's going to be a catalyst for that kind of discussion. Yet currently, year to date, there have been 74 line of duty deaths among law enforcement, but 128 suicides.
Wow.
It's typically twice as many. In my career, I mentioned I lost one fellow officer in a gunfight. 3 other officers committed suicide during my 28 years. And 2 sheriff's deputies on the sheriff's department in our city also killed themselves. So that's 5 to 1.
Wow. I mean, I'm sure you don't know the answer why these folks did what they did, but, you know, is it the stress of the job? Is it just because you're bottling all of these emotions in?
It's the stress of the job. You're bottling emotions in. You see a lot of violence. Not every one of these suicide was gun related, but, you know, we always have a gun on us. So it's real easy. And the more access you have to a gun, the quicker your decision could be made for you. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if you have to think things through, you've got a little time. If you have to plan, if you've got to develop a way to kill yourself, it takes longer, and that time can help. But, you know, there's that pistol right there.
And so, as you mentioned before, you've partnered with the National Police Suicide Foundation.
They're my first partner. In the perfect world, lots more people become aware of the book, and I can move the book around and use it to open up conversations with police departments. There are a number of organizations. The Southern States Police Benevolent Association has a program to aid in stress and suicide, and they might be another partner. But I like the National Police Suicide Foundation. I was fortunate 3 years ago, while I was really developing the book and what I wanted to do with the book, I attended a police conference in Baltimore. Now, I was a retired cop, but they still could let me go. And it was about stress and suicide prevention. Mm-hmm. I met the director of the Suicide Foundation, and I was very impressed with him for 2 reasons. I liked the training that he was giving to police agencies around the country in how to recognize stress, how to mitigate it, how to reach out to their officers. And he also conducts a no-tell helpline that cops can call without fear that their agency is going to be notified. Again, there's still a stigma, and they'd rather not call somebody who they think is about to hang up and call their chief of police and say, hey, Officer Bergin's thinking about offing himself. You've got to go take his gun away. We don't want that. I've decided to give half of my my profit from the book. But I want the book to be something that ideally cops can read. It can prompt a conversation. It can get them thinking about it and talking about it to try and relieve that stress.
And you did mention some of the resources that are out there already, you know, and this story does take place in 1988. But how is it different if the story takes place in 2018 or in our current day?
Well, the first thing that's different is if everybody had a cell phone, none of my conflicts would occur. and the story would just evaporate. I think that departments are getting better at recognizing the impact of stress. Certainly with me, I think I ended up having to retire because of what the doctors saw as stress causing my hypertension, my coronary artery disease, and not letting me go back to work. My doctor said to me, the last cop like you that I sent back to work died in 2 months. So I don't want you going. I said, well, okay, I don't want to go either then under that circumstance. And I was lucky enough that I'd had a full career and something else to do, that although I didn't want to leave the cops, I looked forward to writing. Like I say, I've always wanted to write, and this was my chance.
Yeah, it's in a sense, it's kind of your form of activism.
I wanted to do something good. What actually happened was, after I had the heart attacks, and in the 3 days or so that I moved from the clinic to the little hospital to the bigger hospital to the coronary care unit in Norfolk, every time you move somewhere, you talk to doctors and nurses, and they say, do you know why you're here? And they're evaluating your answer. And I tell them, I had 100% blockage of the left anterior descending artery. And their eyes would get really wide. And some of them would say, that's the widowmaker. We don't find that in living people. So I had this nurse in Norfolk put her hand on my shoulder and say, you're not supposed to be with us anymore. God's got something else for you to do. Now, I don't necessarily know that that's my image of God, but I thought about it. And when it came time to retire and came time to write, I decided to see if there was something I could do better than just write a book. When I first envisioned the book, the main theme of it, in addition to it being a police procedural mystery, was I was going to look at race relations. I was on a unit of nothing but white guys, and we worked in the poor neighborhoods of Alexandria, so we arrested almost nothing but young black men. And that was awkward, and that was stressful itself. So that was the theme of the book. Still is a little bit. I talk about that, but I switched the theme over to more carefully examine and emphasize the stress that can lead to suicide within the profession.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to speak with you as well, just to keep the dialogue going. I know that just from my own experience with friends and family, being a police officer is a really tough job, and being an American right now is a pretty tough job, to be honest with you. But we don't have to be so polarized. You can back the blue and still believe that Black Lives Matter. You can, you don't have to be, you know, mutually exclusive to one or the other. And the fact that police suicide is something that, at least to my knowledge, isn't acknowledged or even mentioned at all, I thought that this was a unique opportunity. And I think that your book is fascinating for encouraging this conversation to continue and in some cases begin. Yes,
I'm trying. I've had some good positive feedback, some reviews, and I've talked to some of the people who've read it, who enjoyed it and appreciated it. I did have one former partner who retired a while ago, and he said he read it and his nightmares came back. And I sort of saw that as a win. I saw that as, I'm writing a realistic book.
Okay, well, great. Well, it was great speaking with you. Was there anything else that you wanted to discuss or wanted to mention?
No, I think you let me get out all of my major points. This was exciting. Your questions were interesting, and thank you. Thank you for drawing me out in this way.
So where can readers go to learn more about you and your books online?
I have a website that is my blog site. It's markberginwriter.com, and Bergin is Bergin. I have a Facebook page of Mark Bergin Writer. The book is at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And right now, one small bookstore in Falls Church has me on the shelf. So we're slowly expanding.
And with that, we're going to wrap up another episode. Thanks again to Mark Bergin for speaking with us today. And if you'd like to learn more about the National Police Suicide Foundation, you can check out their website or give them a call at 866-276-4615. If you have any questions or comments for Mark or for me, or you know an author who you think would be a good fit for the show, let me know. Connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or send an email to info@ch1podcast.com. Check out our website at ch1podcast.com, where there you can listen to previous episodes and hopefully find your next favorite author. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Overcast, everywhere podcasts can be downloaded. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. But most importantly, tell everyone you know about the show, because that is how we grow. Okay, once again, that's it for me. You all stay awesome. Till next time.